Welcome to Strange Encounters, where the ordinary meets the unexplained. Here, we explore moments that defy reason and linger long after their experience. Every story is a glimpse into encounters that are as fascinating as they are unexplainable. Tonight, one of them may make you question what you thought you knew. So settle in and step with me into the unknown. I never imagined that my life could hold something so inexplicable, something that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. It started when I was very young, living at my parents' home in Redondo Beach, California. One night, I awoke to a presence in my room. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, but my mind was wide awake. A figure was there, a humanoid shape, but wrong in every possible way. Its skin was pale, almost luminous, and its fingers were impossibly long and thin. I remember its eyes, red and glowing, fixed on me with an intensity I can still feel now. It was as if it was staring not just at me, but through me. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I was able to move again. But something inside me had shifted. Something had been opened that I couldn't close. Years later, in 1975, the incidents became more vivid. I was living in an apartment in Panorama City with my roommate Joe. One night, I was awoken by a sound, a hum, like a low vibrating frequency moving through the walls. Then a voice, inside my mind, calling me. Not words exactly, but a pull, a command. Go with them. I wanted to resist, but my body moved before I could think. I felt myself lifted, suspended, weightless. I passed through the walls of my apartment as if they were nothing. The air shimmered, and then I saw it. A dark, dome-shaped craft hovering in the night. Bright light radiated from it, not like sunlight or lamps, but from the very walls themselves. Inside, the room was sterile and alien, yet almost organic. There was a table, stone-like, glowing faintly, transparent in parts, and on it, objects seemed to float, moving on their own as if following some unseen rhythm. The beings were there, short, 3 to 4 feet tall, their heads disproportionately large, their eyes vast, dark, observing. Their bodies were pale, smooth, almost featureless, though it was hard to tell where flesh ended and the suit began. I remember the sensation of being scanned. Lights from the ceiling, or perhaps from the walls themselves, played over me in patterns I couldn't comprehend. I felt them examining, recording. I didn't know what they wanted, but there was a sense of purpose in everything they did. Jo later told me, under regression, that she experienced something too. She had been awake, sensing me disappear, feeling herself lifted, enveloped in light. She didn't see them as clearly as I did, but she knew they were there. The sense of being observed, of being part of something vast and unknown, left her trembling. I can still hear her describing the sensation, the floating, the telepathy. The light scanned her body like she was a specimen. I wish I could forget those moments, but somehow they linger, intertwined with my own memories. When I tried to leave the craft, pressing a door, hoping to escape, I was instantly returned to my apartment. I awoke on my bed, the night silent except for the low hum still vibrating faintly in my ears. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night and feel the same paralysis creeping over me, the same sense that I was being watched. Years passed, and in 1979, under hypnosis, I recalled more. The table was not just a table, it was some kind of recording device, a way for them to imprint and store information. Beams of light traced across my body, through me, leaving a mark I couldn't see but somehow felt. Their movements were precise, deliberate. They were not cruel, not angry, but utterly alien, operating on a logic I could not understand. I tried to resist. I pressed a door, tried to step away, but the boundaries of the craft obeyed them, not me. I was moved, floated, returned, and still I could not forget. Even now, I don't understand it. I only know what I experienced, what I remember through flashes, through regression, through the fragments my mind has pieced together. Joe remembers too, and we share a connection that no one else can fully comprehend. I have seen their eyes in my mind, felt their presence, sensed their intent, and I carry that knowledge with me in every shadow, every flicker of light, every hum in the night. I can't explain why it happened to us. I can't say what they want, but I know it was real. I know I was taken, and I know that somewhere, in the vastness of the unknown, those beings recorded everything about me, about Joe, about the world we call home, and perhaps they still are. I've gone over that night more times than I can count, and even now, I still don't know where the dream ended and the reality began, if it ended at all. All I can do is tell it the way I remember it. It was just after 2 a.m. I remember lying in bed, awake but drifting. Nothing unusual. My husband asleep beside me, the house perfectly quiet. And then, I wasn't in my bed anymore. There was no transition that I can recall, no sound, no sensation of standing up or walking, just the sudden awareness that I was rising. My body was upright, my arms loose at my sides, and a wind surrounded me. A swirling, controlled wind, almost like being inside a vertical current. I could move my arms, I could look around, and that was when I realized I wasn't indoors anymore. Somehow, without crossing a doorway, I was outside, being lifted through the air. Above me, the night sky separated into a circular opening, like a hole cut straight through the darkness. A bright white light poured out from it, too bright to be natural, too steady to be anything I recognized. And then I saw them. 3 figures floated alongside me, keeping pace effortlessly. They moved without any visible effort, almost drifting, yet always at my same height. Their bodies were thin, so thin they looked fragile, but their presence felt completely in control. None of them touched me, yet I sensed they were guiding my ascent. As we approached the opening in the sky, I made the mistake of looking down. I saw the roof of my house first, then the neighborhood, and then the entire city of Rosario shrinking beneath me. The light softened into a blur. The streets dissolved into darkness. It all felt surreal, familiar shapes turning into distant patterns. At some point during the climb, exhaustion overcame fear. I fell asleep or blacked out. I don't know which. I woke to a wave of freezing cold, sharp enough to snap me fully awake. A metallic sound echoed behind me, something like a hatch sealing shut. My feet weren't touching anything. I was floating through a hexagonal opening, emerging into a vast, dimly lit chamber. As my eyes adjusted, the scale of it hit me. The room was enormous, stretching far beyond what the weak lighting could reach, and suspended throughout it were floating cots, maybe 20 of them, each one holding a human body, motionless as if asleep. To my right, only a few meters away, I recognized my sister. She was on one of the cots, eyes closed, completely unaware of me. She had gone to bed in her own home that night, yet here she was. A few cots further away, I noticed a black man I'd never seen before, lying perfectly still. Somewhere in the background was a rhythmic snoring, soft, steady, echoing faintly through the huge space. The sound made the whole place feel strangely inhabited, and somehow more terrifying. Then I heard the voices, not spoken aloud, soft, quick, layered, more like thoughts brushing against my own mind. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt the urgency in them, a tense, hurried quality. The 3 beings approached me then, drifting through the air with that same effortless motion. Up close, they were about 1.60 meters tall. Their bodies were pale beige, almost translucent, with a soft, flexible look, like gelatin more than flesh. Their heads were elongated and smooth, with no hair. Their noses were nothing more than 2 small holes, their mouths barely more than a line. But their eyes, large, cat-like, glowing a bluish gray, the kind of eyes that never blink. Their hands had 3 long fingers, each connected by a thin membrane, and a separate thumb-like structure. Everything about them seemed adapted to a different environment, a place where weight and gravity didn't matter. As they looked at me, I felt something unexpected. Desperation. Not malice, not cruelty, just a deep, urgent need, as if time were running out for them. One of them lifted a thin tube, maybe 30 centimeters long. A faint beam of light shone from its tip. He moved it slowly over my head, and wherever the beam passed, I felt a warm sensation. Not painful, just strange, as if the heat were radiating inward instead of outward. In that moment, thoughts not my own slipped into my mind, disjointed impressions, fragments of meaning, a sense that these beings were struggling to reproduce and failing. I don't know how I understood it, but I did. They saw Earth as a place to gather what they needed, genetic material from men and women, a staging ground for their survival. Another one measured my face from ear to ear, and I felt a telepathic reassurance telling me everything was going to be fine. But the words felt hollow, almost rehearsed, manipulative. Fear finally broke through whatever calm they were trying to impose. I sensed they needed human bodies, living bodies, as containers for something they couldn't grow on their own. And as they drifted closer, their hands reached out, that fear turning into pure terror. I asked them, half shouting in my mind, if they were spiritual beings. They said yes, but even as the thought formed, I could feel the lie in it. One leaned closer and reached toward my chest. When I pushed his hand away, my fingers sank into his arm. There was no bone, no firmness, just a soft, gummy resistance that recoiled slightly at my touch. Something snapped in me then. Panic, revulsion, the instinct to get away from them. Everything after that collapses into fragments, rapid flashes, a descent, wind rushing around me, and for reasons I still don't understand, images of famous people flickering around me. John F. Kennedy, Adolf Hitler, Judy Garland, faces appearing like projections in the air before dissolving into darkness. Then suddenly, I was in my bed, drenched in sweat, shaking violently, my throat raw as if I had been screaming. My husband was sitting beside me, wide awake, trying to calm me down while asking what had happened. I didn't have an answer then, and I'm not sure I have one now. I only know what I experienced and what I can't forget. It was a quiet September night in 1977 in a small corner of Dorset, England. The streets were calm, the stars clear above, and the houses dark. In one modest home on Seaview Road, Parkstone, a 62-year-old housewife, Mrs. Ethel May Field, stepped out into her back garden. She had gone only to collect laundry from the clothesline, a routine, mundane task. But on this ordinary night, the sky would deliver something utterly extraordinary. Mrs. Field noticed a humming sound, low and persistent, that seemed to come from the direction of the sky itself. Looking up, her eyes caught a shape moving swiftly across the clear night. It was round, with a dome on top, glimmering with a grayish glow. Around its perimeter, a brilliant bluey-yellow light beamed downward, forming a shape that reminded her of an umbrella. The object seemed enormous, perhaps the width of her garden, hovering close enough that she could see them. Inside the dome were 2 humanoid figures. They stood upright, facing her through small, tall windows that covered only part of the structure. Their suits were silver, their headwear pointed at the forehead, faces visible, arms of normal human proportion, hands gloved, or so it seemed. One appeared to be working controls, while the other looked directly at her. Then a gesture, a down-pointing motion of the hand, almost as if to indicate intent to land. Mrs. Field's instincts were clear. Fear, alarm. She turned and ran toward the house, glancing back just in time to see the object streak away into the night, heading northwest. From start to finish, no more than 30 seconds had passed. Inside the house, her husband and adult daughter were oblivious, engrossed in the television. When she tried to explain what she had just witnessed, they laughed, dismissing her account as fanciful. She would not speak of it to anyone else for weeks. It remained a private, silent memory. But the story does not end there. In the days following the sighting, Mrs. Field noticed something strange. A spot appeared on her left palm. Over the next week, it spread, leaving both hands raw and painful. A doctor diagnosed dermatitis, an inflammation of the skin caused by local irritation. She never claimed the condition was caused by the UFO, but when we consider the timing, the sensation of heat she felt as she held her hands against the intense light, the fact that she had never experienced anything like it before, it becomes impossible to ignore. The media, when they eventually caught wind of her story, were less than accurate. One headline claimed a saucer had swooped on her. Another described burns, gross exaggerations. And the most glaring fabrication? The Coast Guards had seen it too. Nothing could have been further from the truth. The press transformed her careful, personal account into something sensationalized, removing her voice in the process. But the truth remained. In the quiet of her back garden, in that brief encounter with beings she could see clearly, yet who existed in a world just beyond ours. What did she see? A machine controlled by humanoid occupants, emitting light so intense it could singe skin. A moment of contact with something utterly alien, yet tangible. The object itself, hovering silently, seemed to acknowledge her presence, if only for a heartbeat. And then it was gone. For Mrs. Field, the experience left a mark, not just on her skin, but on her understanding of the universe, a reminder that the extraordinary can arrive unannounced in the most ordinary of places and leave us questioning the very nature of reality. The Parkstone sighting is not famous like other encounters, and perhaps that is part of its power. There is no fame, no spectacle, only a quiet witness, a brief glimpse into something beyond our world, and a story told decades later with honesty and care. In the garden, on a clear Dorset night, a housewife reached for her laundry and for a fleeting moment touched the unknown. Late on the evening of Thursday, October 4th, 2001, a small clearing along the Bruce Highway near the rural town of Tiero, Australia, sat quiet under a cooling spring sky. It was the kind of stillness common in the countryside, an easy darkness punctuated only by the hum of distant traffic and the soft rustling of trees. A single caravan, weathered and plain, stood as the only habitation on the cleared lot. Inside, 3 people settled into the night. Keith was the property owner, a man in his 40s, practical, steady, and not much for embellishment. His wife, revitalizing after years of health struggles, moved slowly but carried a warmth in her voice. And visiting them for a few weeks was Petra Heller, a German tourist in her mid-30s. She had light brown hair, wire-framed glasses, and a polite, slightly formal way about her, shaped by years of office work back home. For Petra, Australia had been a needed break, a pause from a life that had become routine. No one in the caravan felt anything unusual about the night ahead. It was quiet, even comforting, the kind of backdrop against which something extraordinary can, without warning, occur. Shortly after 11, Petra awoke. She later said it wasn't a noise that pulled her from sleep, but a kind of presence, a sense of something foreign intruding into the night. She sat up on the couch, rubbed her eyes, and noticed a faint glow through the curtains. It wasn't the pale wash of moonlight. It was deeper, thicker, and strangely uniform. Against her better judgment, Petra rose and pulled the curtain aside, and what she saw froze her completely. Hovering over the backyard, no more than 30 meters from the caravan, was a large, disc-shaped craft. It emitted a bright bluish-white glow, strong enough to silhouette the trees and push sharp shadows across the clearing. The object was silent, absolutely silent. Petra stared, unable to process what she was looking at, when something else caught her attention. A shaft of light descended from the craft, as if drawn downward like a column. Inside that column, 3 figures were drifting slowly toward the ground. Petra gasped, an involuntary, instinctive sound, and stepped back. In that moment, every part of her body insisted she was seeing something impossible. Yet the light remained steady, and the figures moved with deliberate, unhurried motion, as though gravity itself had loosened its grip. The glow bounced off their small frames, making them appear elongated and slightly distorted. Their heads were enlarged, their limbs were slender, and despite the details being softened by the brightness, Petra was certain they were not human. The fear hit her all at once. She fainted. When Petra regained consciousness, she found herself lying on the caravan floor, disorientated and chilled. The glow outside had not changed. Neither had the sense of something terribly wrong. She screamed for Keith. Her cry jolted him awake. Stumbling from the bedroom, he found Petra pale and trembling, pointing at the window. Keith rushed to look outside. Later, he said the first thing he noticed was the brightness. Too intense, too focused to be anything ordinary. He squinted into it and saw the craft hovering over the yard exactly as Petra described. The 3 figures, now on the ground, appeared to be moving toward the caravan. Keith backed away in terror. He grabbed the phone with shaking hands and dialed the Tiero police. The call was logged at 11:40 p.m. 2 officers were dispatched, but the property sat deep off the highway, and it took around 90 minutes for them to arrive. By that time, the craft was gone. The clearing was dark again. Keith was still shaken, his wife confused and frightened, and Petra sitting hunched on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, unable to articulate everything she had seen. The officers took statements. They noted the sincerity of the witnesses, the seeming absence of alcohol or agitation. They also noted something else, the physical effects. Several trees near the clearing appeared scorched on one side. A section of dry grass had been flattened into a perfect circular pattern, and the family's dog, normally energetic and alert, shook uncontrollably and refused to go near the yard. But the most troubling detail emerged when Keith mentioned they had not seen Petra for several minutes after she fainted. When they found her on the floor, the door had been unlatched, and although she insisted she had simply collapsed and woken where she fell, her shoes and trousers were damp with morning dew, an impossibility if she had not stepped outside. The officers recorded everything, though neither could explain it. By early morning, the story seemed destined to become one of those strange, unsettling local tales, the kind that drifts quietly through a rural police station and gathers dust. But the next day, things took a dramatic turn. A call came in from Mackay, Queensland, nearly 790 kilometers north of Tiero. A woman had been found wandering near a roadway, confused and dehydrated. She had no memory of how she arrived there. Her identity was Petra Heller. She was wearing the same clothes she had on when she vanished from the caravan. She was missing her glasses, and her feet were stained with a reddish dust common in central Queensland, not in Tiero. When officers spoke with her, Petra gave an account that was fragmented and dreamlike, yet chillingly consistent. She said she remembered lying on the couch, then waking in a place filled with light, unable to move. She described small beings with elongated heads and large eyes, communicating without speech. She spoke of a feeling of separation, not pain, but detachment, as though her body were being examined by something without emotion, without curiosity. At one point, she recalled being floated through a curved corridor. At another, lying on a surface that felt smooth but warm. Most of her memories, she admitted, were only flashes, but one stood out in sharper focus, a moment when she asked, in German, to be taken home. She didn't speak the word aloud, she thought it, and immediately afterward, she felt herself being moved, as though relocated with direction, not force. The next thing she remembered was waking on the roadside outside Mackay, morning sun in her face. Police compared Petra's account to the timing of the initial report from Tiero. The gaps were consistent, so was the physical evidence found on her clothing. Officers interviewed her multiple times. Each time, her description of the beings remained the same: small, thin, large heads, silent. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly. It made front pages across Australia, not just because of Petra's experience, but because the police themselves had filed detailed reports and conducted formal interviews. This was not a case discussed as hallucination or attention-seeking. Officers involved publicly confirmed Petra appeared genuinely traumatized and physically displaced. The Queensland UFO scene, already active in the early 2000s, took immediate interest. Researchers visited both Mackay and the Tiero property. Some documented residual electromagnetic readings near the flattened grass. Others examined scorch marks on the trees. A few interviewed neighbors who recalled a strange light in the sky late that night, though none saw the craft clearly. In the weeks that followed, Petra struggled with sleep. She reported recurring images of the beings, not nightmares, but flashes that arrived unbidden, as though replaying fragments of a memory she could neither dismiss nor fully grasp. Keith and his wife continued to live on the property, though they avoided the clearing at night. They remained firm in their statements until their deaths. To this day, Petra's relocation remains one of the most difficult details to dismiss. The sheer distance between Tiero and Mackay, combined with the short window in which she disappeared, has no conventional explanation. Police found no evidence of transport, no witness to an abduction, and no indications of a voluntary journey, and Petra herself maintained that she had no physical sensation of traveling, only a sudden, disorientating shift from one place to another. Today, this case stands as one of Australia's strangest abduction accounts. It involved multiple credible witnesses, physical evidence at the scene, police documentation, and a displacement event that defies straightforward interpretation. In a field filled with ambiguous lights and solitary testimonies, this is one of the rare encounters where all those pieces, witness, environment, and aftermath, align into something that still resists explanation. Whether it was an encounter with non-human intelligence, a phenomenon we cannot yet comprehend, or something else entirely, the events of that night continue to echo along the Bruce Highway. For Petra, for Keith, and for the officers who stepped into that clearing at dawn, it remains a mystery that has never settled comfortably into memory. It was the dead of night, December 6, 1978, on the outskirts of Genoa, Italy. The city's distant lights glimmered across the hills, but up here, in the darkness of a quiet industrial zone, a lone night watchman made his rounds. His name was Pier Fortunato Zanfretta, a man accustomed to solitude. He patrolled the empty streets with careful vigilance. his flashlight cutting through the shadows, every footstep echoing off abandoned warehouses. Pierre had done this job for years, yet nothing had prepared him for what he would encounter that night. He walked with the casual awareness of someone used to quiet nights, yet even that vigilance did not prepare him for the pulsing hum that would soon penetrate the silence. As he passed a small abandoned parking lot, a strange crimson glow caught the corner of his vision. At first, he thought it was a reflection from a distant streetlight, or the way shadows shifted in the cold night air. But then the glow pulsed, like a heartbeat, and a low, vibrating hum filled the atmosphere. Pierre froze, every muscle tight, his rational mind struggling to assign a logical explanation. And then he saw it. A craft hovered in front of him, 3 meters tall, oval, its metallic surface shimmering in colors that seemed impossible, from polished silver to deep crimson, as if the light itself bent around its surface. The hum intensified, resonating in his chest and leaving a strange, almost electric sensation in his fingertips. Pierre's heart raced. He had always been grounded, a man of careful observation, yet here was something entirely outside of his comprehension. Rational thought felt irrelevant. Fear, awe, and disbelief intertwined as he remained rooted to the spot. 3 figures emerged from the craft. They were impossibly tall, elongated in proportion, their feet ending in sharp, claw-like forms. Their skin was grayish-brown, textured like reptilian hide, and their eyes glowed a fierce yellow. They moved deliberately, with a silent precision that was unsettling, their attention fixed on him. Pierre felt a paralysis that went beyond fear. His body simply would not obey. He tried to speak, to call for help, but no sound came. The hum of the craft seemed to envelop him, vibrating through his bones, and for a moment he wondered if he had stepped into some waking dream. One of the beings gestured, and though no words were spoken, Pierre understood. He was to follow. A strange compulsion, stronger than any thought or will, urged him forward. Before he could resist, a force lifted him from the ground. The air itself seemed to ripple around him. In a heartbeat, he was inside the craft. Its interior was unlike anything he had imagined. Walls of soft white light, panels covered in glowing symbols, pulsing faintly as if alive. The beings surrounded him. Their touch was gentle but firm, examining him with clinical precision. Pierre felt no pain, but a strange, heightened awareness. His senses stretched beyond his body. Images flickered before him, cities, forests, oceans, all viewed from above, moving as if in a coordinated cosmic dance. And then a projection of himself, standing on the very streets he had walked countless times, being observed by alien eyes. Time seemed irrelevant. Moments stretched, compressed, then shifted again. When he would later check his watch back in Genoa, only minutes had passed, yet his memory contained a lifetime in that craft. The beings wanted something from him, though he could not understand it fully. Their communication was not words but impressions, patterns of light and emotion. It was urgent yet abstract, a lesson, a warning, a demonstration of knowledge beyond human comprehension. And then, as silently as they had taken him, they returned him to the street. The craft hovered briefly, its lights pulsing softly before vanishing into the sky, leaving only the echo of the hum in the cold night air. Pierre fell to his knees, shaken, his pulse still racing. This night was only the beginning. Between 1978 and 1981, Pierre reported 11 separate encounters. Some occurred during his nightly patrols, others at home, and one even while he slept. Each encounter followed a similar pattern: the craft, the beings, the strange pulsing hum, yet each held new experiences. Sometimes he was lifted from the ground with barely a moment to comprehend what was happening. Other times, he would awaken with unexplained scratches on his arms and neck, or his clothing found unusually warm despite the cold night air. Once, he noticed circular impressions in soil near his apartment, like enormous feet had pressed into the earth. Italian police documented portions of his claims, taking note of the large footprints discovered near some encounter sites. Neighbors occasionally reported strange lights in the sky, glowing orbs, sudden flashes, and even low humming sounds. UFO researchers recorded his testimony, noting that the consistency of his experiences over 3 years made the case unusually compelling. Yet, much of the world remains unaware. Local newspapers printed only passing mentions, and the story largely stayed within the realm of ufology journals and Italian investigative reports. For Peer, the encounters were both terrifying and transformative. Friends and colleagues doubted him, labeling the events as hallucinations or exaggerations. He grappled with disbelief from those closest to him, even as he meticulously recorded each encounter, times, locations, sensations, and the subtle variations between each visit. He described a growing sense of understanding, an awareness that beings observed humanity, perhaps with guidance or curiosity, but without revealing their purpose fully. They were not hostile in the human sense, but their intelligence and intentions were utterly alien. Today, the story of Pier Fortunato Zanfretta remains one of the most detailed and enduring abduction cases in Europe. 11 encounters, physical traces, hypnotic regressions, and independent witness reports create a narrative that challenges skepticism and invites wonder. Whether believed or doubted, the tale persists because it asks fundamental questions. How much of reality lies beyond human perception? Who watches us from the shadows of the night? And if contact is possible, what is the nature of that intelligence? Pier Zanfretta's story does not offer easy answers. Instead, it provides a glimpse into a world both terrifying and fascinating. A world that suggests we are never as alone as we might think. Sometime, in the quiet hours of the night, when the streets of Genoa lie empty and the hills are bathed in darkness, one can almost hear it, that low, resonant hum, reminding us that something extraordinary exists just beyond our perception. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the strange and mysterious. The stories may end, but the questions and wonder don't. If you've had your own unexplained encounters, I'd love to hear them. Share your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed tonight's journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and keep watching, because the unknown is never far away.